إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله تعالى من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالحق بشيرا ونذيرا بين يدي الساعة. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم بعد أن أقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. وقال تعالى: يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. وقال تعالى: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، فإن أصدق الحديث كلام الله وخير الهدي هدي نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So we begin, dear respected brothers and sisters, by firstly thanking Allah Azza wa Jalla for who He is and for what He gives. For verily every single blessing that we have in this earth and in our daily lives is because of the immense blessing and the immense barakah that Allah Azza wa Jalla has bestowed upon us. So we firstly praise and thank Allah for everything that He has given us. And then we commence by sending praise and salutations upon the greatest human being to walk the face of this earth, Sayyid Waladi Adam Rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And it is a very virtuous thing to increase in salawat upon the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam on this blessed Friday. So I encourage firstly myself and my brothers and sisters to try our best to make our tongues busy with the dhikr of Allah and with sending praise and salutations upon the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Again, for verily, anything and everything that we have in our deen can be traced back to Him, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And anything that we do that is not traced back to Him is considered a bid'ah, and we seek refuge in Allah Azza wa Jalla. For verily, bid'ahs are what will take us close to the hellfire, as that is what I said towards the end of that intro. So we seek refuge in Allah from that. And so today's topic, my brothers and sisters, is one that we might hear often and we might hear time to time. And it really is taking and assessing one of the chapters and one of the surahs in the Quran. And it is one that many of us, we look towards and we seek to this surah whenever we are in a hurry, or we might be we might want to finish our salah quickly. And so it is a surah that many of us reach for, but unfortunately many fail to ponder over that over the verses of this surah. And it is in this surah, within this surah lies an ayah in which Allah Azza wa Jalla, He Himself swears upon what we will talk about inshallah. And so when Allah Azza wa Jalla, He swears upon something, that must mean that it should be something that we as Muslims should pay attention to, right? And so this is none other than Suratul Asr, right? Suratul Asr. And the concept of time, my brothers and sisters, again, we hear about it a lot, but the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, the reminder benefits the believer, right? And this is such an incredible blessing that Allah Azza wa Jalla has bestowed upon us, that many of us, unfortunately, again, we fail to realize the blessing of that until we no longer have it, right? Until we no longer have it, or it's taken away from us. And so, similarly, many of the blessings that we have, one of the biggest ones that I can think of is our health, right? Whenever we are healthy, we don't really appreciate that ni'mah that Allah has given us. Again, we ask Allah to always keep us healthy and to give us, that afiyah, that good health, within our lives, and not test us with these, major diseases. But again, whenever we have a slight sickness, just a small fever, and we are in bed, we think, subhanallah, I used to be healthy, and then now, again, in the blink of an eye, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took that, and then we ask Ash-Shafi, right? Ash-Shafi is one of the names of Allah Azza wa Jalla, which means the healer, right? So again, we ask Allah to bring us back to health, right? So similarly, however, this concept of time is also something that we, at the end of our lives, or even sometimes within our daily lives, we might think, man, if only I had taken advantage of that time that had passed, I could have been here, or I could have done that, or I could have done this, right? And we see this a lot with the youth, right? In our youth, if you find students, they work hard, they study, then inshallah, their future, they get into college, they get a good job. These are ways in which they can succeed in their life, right? But you will find, and I've heard this, as a college student myself, I've heard many of my classmates, who I used to go to school, man, I wish I studied a little bit harder for that exam, or I wish I passed that course so that I could be here, or I could do X, Y, Z. But at that point, that time has passed. It's too late, right? You can't come back to it. And so before I, kind of go into the meaning of Surah Al-Asr, which I'm sure many of us are already aware of, I want to highlight the positioning, the placement of Surah Al-Asr in the Quran. Because the previous surah is Surah Al-Takathur. And what does Allah Azza wa Jalla talk about in Surah Al-Takathur? He talks about, and in the first ayah Allah Azza wa Jalla says, Al-Hakum Al-Takathur. And again, this is not the main purpose of the khutbah, but I wanted to show the beauty in which the Quran is constructed, right? Where Allah Azza wa Jalla, He talks about, in Surah Al-Takathur, the first ayah, Al-Hakum Al-Takathur, it's talking about the competition that we have in this world, that humankind has in this world, that diverts them from the remembrance of Allah Azza wa Jalla. So if you look, again, many of our non-Muslim brethren, their main goal in life is to amass as many, worldly accumulations as they can. The latest car, or the latest iPhone, or if I'm already in a house, I want to build a bigger house, right? Or I want to acquire this business. Or it's all about how can I advance in terms of ad-dunya, right? They don't have any other goal besides, increasing in the worldly possessions that they have. And you will find that, subhanAllah, this is the nature of the human being, right? We say, okay, if I get this thing, I will be happy. Or if I obtain that car, I will be happy. But then when you find that Allah gives them that, then they're on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing. They're never, ever content, right? They never have that feeling of qana', that the contentment from worldly possessions is something that we will never be happy with, right? And that is, again, just the nature in which Allah Azza wa Jalla created us. So how do we as Muslims, and some of us, again, fall into that competition, right? See, always wanting to increase in that worldly possessions, right? And wallahi, these worldly things that we look towards and we're always yearning for, as soon as our life on this earth is over, it's never going to come back to us. We're not going to take the gold and the silver and the wealth and the children and all these things. It might benefit us, and we can use it as a tool to live our lives. But if that becomes the primary focus of our existence, then again, when we will see the consequences of that when we are placed in our grave. And again, we seek refuge in Allah Azza wa Jalla from being from those who have this mentality of worldly possessions and always wanting to seek that. And so again, then right after that, Allah Azza wa Jalla, He talks about in Surah Al-Takathur that the competition. Then in the next surah, He talks about the importance of the concept of time. And as I mentioned in the first part of earlier on in the beginning of the khutbah, where Allah Azza wa Jalla, He talks about, He swears on time. That's the first verse of the surah. And it is also, interestingly, one of the shortest verses, but also one of the most profound, right? Because again, as we said, we as Muslims, we cannot swear on anything besides Allah. But Allah can swear on whatever it is that He wants. And there are only a few instances, wal-fajr, wal-asr, wal-shams. So there are only a few instances in which Allah Azza wa Jalla swears by something in the Quran. And again, when Allah Azza wa Jalla Himself is swearing on something, must mean it should be something that we should be thinking about, and we should at the very least learn about it, so that inshallah we can again be from those who are successful with that, whatever again Allah is swearing by. So in this case, if we want to be successful with our time, then we need to learn how to maximize our time. Because again, if we really think about it, the amount of time that we spend on this earth, well, let's say 60, 70, 80, 90 years, and then after that we're going to spend thousands of years in the grave, and then eternity inshallah, we ask Allah to make us from among them in Al-Jannah, right? So if we use the time, and this is the time where we put in that effort, that work, so that inshallah, that our eternal life inshallah is one in which it is successful, right? And we ask Allah to make us from among those who are successful both in Al-Dunya and Al-Akhirah. And so we talked about when Allah Azza wa Jalla, He swears on something, it is something that we should, pay attention to. And one of the great Imams, Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah, he mentioned about this surah, Surah Al-Asr. He said that if Allah Azza wa Jalla were not to reveal any other surah besides this surah, that would suffice. Allahu Akbar, right? So again, that goes to show the importance and the weight that this surah holds. Right, so let's look at inshallah what Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says in the next ayah. It's a very short surah. I'm sure all of us, even the young ones in the back, they probably have memorized this surah. Right, so Allah Azza wa Jalla, He then continues, Innal insana lafi khusr. Subhanallah. He says, Subhanah, indeed mankind is in loss. Right, indeed mankind is in a state of loss. And we talked again a little bit about why mankind is in a state of loss. Because mankind in general, they're always seeking these worldly things. They're always seeking these worldly possessions. They forgot about their purpose on this earth. What does Allah say about our purpose? Allah did not create jinn and mankind. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Allah did not create us except so that we can worship Him. Right? Subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, again, what do we find most of the people doing these days? They're definitely not, again, indeed mankind is in loss. You will find people wasting their time. Or you will find people doing things that are disobedient to Allah. Or you will find people, they are just in general heedless, right? Even amongst Muslims, unfortunately, right? We just waste our time. If we have some free time, we go and we just either we doom scroll on our phone, or essentially we don't use it to do things that are productive, right? And again, unfortunately, a lot of the things that you find people doing in their free time, which is when they're not at school, when they're not at work, is again things that are neither going to benefit them in a dunya, nor it's going to benefit them in an akhirah, right? So for example, people who are always on their phone, or people who are always watching TV. Now again, I'm not saying these things are haram, or we shouldn't be doing these things, but we at least should have a goal in our life. We should have at least have priorities set where we follow those. Again, yet you'll find most of mankind in the insana lafi khusr. And so then we learn Allah Azza wa Jalla is telling us, and when Allah tells us something, it's haqq, right? Even whatever Allah Azza wa Jalla He says, it is the truth, right? So when Allah Azza wa Jalla is telling us mankind is in a state of loss, then we should be thinking, okay, how Allah Azza wa Jalla is telling us mankind is in loss. How can I be from among those who are not in a state of loss? And that is where Allah Azza wa Jalla in the next ayah, He tells us, He makes exceptions for the people who are not grouped from among those who are in a state of loss, where He says, Subhana, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. So let's break down, there's a few characteristics that Allah Azza wa Jalla tells us about for the people who are not in a state of loss. So what does Allah Azza wa Jalla start with? إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, except for those who believe. Believe in what? Believe in Allah Azza wa Jalla. Right? And it's beautiful how Allah Azza wa Jalla, right after amanu, He says, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Because you cannot believe in something and then do the opposite of what you say you believe in. For example, if you say, I believe in safety on the roads, but you're driving at 80 miles per hour when the speed limit is 30, do you really believe that safety on the road is important to you? Or you tell everyone about safety, but you don't wear your seatbelt? Your action is showing the exact opposite of what you are saying you believe. So if I say I believe in Allah, then I need to follow that up with action, right? And that action is so important. Because again, talk is cheap. Anyone can say things, right? But really, our actions will be a manifestation of the belief that we have in our heart, right? And so this is a characteristic that Allah Azza wa Jalla He starts with. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, who believe, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, and follow it up with, righteous actions, righteous deeds. And then Allah Azza wa Jal, He continues. He says, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ. And they advise each other with the truth, right? They enjoin good. They advise one another to do good. So hey, you have a bunch of friends that get together. Let's go to pray Salat al-Isha at the masjid, right? وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ. Or you see something that someone is doing that's incorrect. You see an injustice and you try to correct it. You say, hey, that might not be the best way in which you approach that. You are advising them to become better, right? And that is how we get better, right? When we advise one another and we remind one another. And so that is what Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ. And then lastly, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. You advise one another with patience. SubhanAllah. Look at all these characteristics. A lot of times, patience is one of those characteristics that's really hard to have, right? Especially, for example, we see our brothers and sisters in Gaza, for example. It's really hard to see that, but that is where we need to exercise patience, and we need to use that patience and then follow it up with action. We need to, do what we can, right? Make dua. We need to be active in our communities, right? And you advise one another to be patient. And, so those are the 4 characteristics that Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says that these, if you are from among these people, then inshallah you will not be from among those who are in the insan al-fitness, who are from among those who are in a state of loss. So we said, what are those 4? إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, those who believe, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, follow that up with righteous actions, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ, and advise one another with the truth, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, advise one another and advise one another to have patience. And we ask Allah to make us from amongst those. We ask Allah to allow us to use our time wisely. And inshallah, in the next part of the Khutbah, we'll kind of talk about what are some of the things that we can do. Again, we could talk for hours about how we can make proper use of our time. But inshallah, we'll try to address a few things, inshallah, that we can do to make the best and make the maximum out of the short time that we have on this earth. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأبقي صلاة الله ثم سلامه على أسعد خلق الله أجمعين، نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين، وارض اللهم عن الخلفاء الراشدين المهديين أبي بكر وعمر وعثمان وعلي وعن سائر أصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد. So we talked a little bit about the importance of time, and that we are in this earth for a very short period of time. So how can we maximize that time? I see many young, professionals here. We might be busy with our jobs. We might be busy with school. So really, at the end of the day, we might not have a lot of free time, right? So one of the things that we can do, and this is the beauty of Islam, right, is to always renew your intention for what it is you and I are doing. So for example, if I'm going to school so that until I can, one day get a job so I can provide for my family, I can take care of my family, and then I can give sadaqah. So for example, those who are in the medical field, I can, help the community, I can take part in volunteering. So if you renew your intention, you going to work, you going to school, whatever it is that you do, every single second of the day, you could be obtaining a reward if you have with the correct niyyah, with the correct intention. So that's the number one thing that we can do. And it is one of the greatest things that we can do, because again, every single second of our day can be an act of ibadah, can be an act of worship, if we set aside that proper intention. And this can be, one of the Salaf used to say, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, rahimahullah, he used to say, intention is one of the hardest things that I struggle with. And so these are, the scholars of old who are saying that intention is one of the biggest things that I struggle with. So again, we as Muslims, we should try to renew our intention as much as possible. Again, remind myself, what am I doing this for? I'm doing it for the sake of Allah. I'm doing it for the sake of Allah. And then the second thing is, obviously, this is very important as Muslims, keeping up with our fara'id, right? And more specifically, our salah, right? We find that, for many times, even amongst Muslims, unfortunately, people can get heedless about the salah. yeah, the time for Dhuhr just came in, I have until 5 o'clock. No, the Prophet ﷺ, when the time for Salah comes in, you pray Salah at its appointed time. Right? So prioritize that ibadah, prioritize that Salah. Because again, it is very dangerous for those who leave off Salah completely. The Prophet ﷺ said, بَيْنَ الْمُؤْمِنِ وَبَيْنَ الْكَافِرِ تَرْكُ الصَّلَاةِ. The person the difference between a believer and a non-believer is Salah. So again, very, very important to keep up with that and to try to revolve our day around Salah. And wallahi, you will find that when you prioritize the Salah, when you prioritize the rights of your Creator upon you, Allah Azza wa Jalla will take care of you. And He will make things easy for you, and He will fill your life with barakah, right? And that's something, the barakah is something that's not really tangible. We can't see it, and we can't feel it, as in we can't feel it with our hands, and we can't see it, but it's something that will make our lives easier, and it's something that will give us that tranquility, or get us closer to that we are all seeking, that contentment in our heart. And then the next thing I will say, number 3, is to try to keep up with the Book of Allah, the speech of Allah, Al-Quran, right? Whatever it is, try to set aside whether it's a certain time or a certain amount of Quran that you read. I like to do it such that I set, okay, 30 minutes a day, I will be just reading Quran. It doesn't matter how much you read, it doesn't matter how much you recite, but just set aside that time so you can build that relationship with the Book of Allah. Because the more you build that relationship with the Book of Allah again, and you try to learn the meaning, and you try to understand what it is that we are reading in Salah, such as like today we're looking at the meaning of Surah Al-Asr, again, the more pleasure and the more contentment you will find in worshiping Allah. Because wallahi, the difference between understanding and knowing the tafsir, the meaning behind what you're reading, it really helps you improve the khushu' that you have in yourself. So that's number 3. And lastly, I will say, is we're all looking to increase in rizq, right? We always ask Allah for a rizq. Allah is Ar-Razzaq, and we seek that rizq from Allah Azza wa Jalla. And one of the ways that we can, again, in an authentic hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, one of the ways in which we can increase our rizq is to strengthen that family ties, right? Strengthen the connection between our family. And so, that cousin that, we might have an issue with, I, loaned him some money and he didn't pay me back. For the sake of Allah, try to find it within ourselves to forgive, especially from amongst our family. Because that is, again, how we have that barakah in our life, and how we can increase in rizq is by, again, maintaining and keeping that family tie and that family connection. And these are some of the things that we can do, inshallah, to maximize the time that we have on this earth. We ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to make us from among those who are successful with our time. We ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to allow us and to put barakah in our life such that we can do a lot, even though our time on this earth is very short. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك يا مولانا سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات. عباد الله إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم انصر الإسلام وأعز المسلمين. اللهم انصر عبادك المستضعفين في غزة. اللهم انصرهم عباد الله. إن الله تعالى يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. وقوموا إلى صلاتكم.